Welcome to Ruby Thursday. I'm Melissa Wanish. This recording of the Ruby Roundtable meetup took place on April 13th, 2016. Thanks again to our awesome sponsor, ThoughtWorks, for hosting and providing some yummy food. Thanks so much. In this meetup, we discussed Trailblazer. Matthew Jordan introduced us to Trailblazer and outlined when you should consider using Trailblazer in your Rails app. Rails gives you a certain structure. Trailblazer adds to that. It really defines where you need to put everything. It was a really great discussion, so I hope you enjoy it.
Matthew Jordan. I am a polyglot. I work on Rails a lot, but I also work on projects with other backends, and I work on a lot of front-end stuff. One of the best things about Rails is that it has conventions, but today we're going to talk about extending those conventions and using a framework that starts to give you more modular things that generally in most shops you start to develop anyway. Okay? So you've used Trailblazer or just heard of it?
I just read about it.
Cool. What have you read?
The official website and some people's reviews of it.
Cool. So yeah, Trailblazer is a high-level architecture. Hey! Oh, you're just in time to introduce yourself and not hear any introductions from anyone else.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Introduce myself. I'm Corva. I've been a developer for, I guess, a long time now. And my favorite language is Ruby. And right now I actually am developing in Rails.
Cool. Have you used Trailblazer?
I never even heard of it.
Wow, fantastic.
You guys are the ones that keep me here.
Oh, that's a heavy burden to bear.
Talking to a guy with a mic clip to his head.
It's a new thing, man. Yeah, don't you know? Alright, so Trailblazer is a high-level architecture for the web. It is meant to be used on top of Rails, and it is meant to tackle the challenge of managing complexity. So what are the problems that surface due to complexity? How do you know you're dealing with complexity? New features are hard to estimate. You guys estimate features at your shops? Yes? So you're using agile processes, you see a feature and you somehow assign some value to that feature that represents complexity, and sometimes you don't know whether it's a 2 or a 12 or a 16 or an 8.
And often you estimate it and then nothing else happens to track whether you match the estimate or anything like that.
Yeah. Those are all reasons. Those are all symptoms you're doing some things wrong. But if you're having trouble after a few sprints, after a few weeks of actually estimating and delivering code, after estimating those features, and you still find that new features are still hard to estimate, that's an indication you have complexity issues. I feel like there's a you're a redneck one bit that we could slip into here.
Sure.
You have coders who are afraid to touch certain parts of the code base. Also a complexity issue. New developers that come out of the project take more than a day to contribute. I would say that anything more than a day is a long time to ramp up on a Rails project, even if you have a complex front end. Right? If you're contributing to Rails and you have something that you take more than a day to actually understand and contribute the next day, then there's potentially a problem. Your code is hard to unit test. It's not broken out into small, consumable unit testable features. If you have continuous integration, who here deals with continuous integration? All right, you all should. CodeShip is free still? Yeah, CodeShip is my new favorite, I think. It's good fun. and it's free. They have a free layer.
You're hip again.
Yeah, that's the mic.
Circle CI and then we use.
Circle CI is great too. I think Circle CI is also still free. Semaphore is free. They all have free layers. You should definitely use something.
I like Semaphore because code climate plugs right into it.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. I'm not sure. The last two clients have not used code climate. Not actually all that pleased about that. But yeah, code climate also is a great resource. So you have big classes with many responsibilities. That's just a sign of bad OO design, which is also complex. And you don't know where exactly to put new features or new logic, where this code should live. You have to think about it. That's a problem. That's complexity. And every application that you'll see, every application that exists in any language faces that type of complexity. That's why you have so many frameworks. That's why Rails exists. That's why React exists. That's why Rails, Swing, Struts, everything, all of the different layers to manage different sections of code, whether it be object database relational persistence or UI layers, whatever. All of those things exist to help manage and have consistency for for complexity. Back in the day, we used to write our own database drivers, right, and everything else, and from scratch, and that's like unheard of these days. You know, every language, everything has its own, at least somewhat conventional code bases for that. Okay. So MVC and Rails in general as the MVC layer.
We're just, the speakers aren't out there, so I'm going to turn those ones off.
Sorry about that.
Hi everyone.
And hello everybody. You can keep talking.
Hey everybody.
Okay, so.
So awesome. I'm thinking back of everything I've said.
Yeah, that was maybe 4 hours.
That's good. That's a good thing.
Well, I think what before the speaker was on.
Did I say anything horrible?
No.
Just to Florida, right?
Just to Florida. But even then, the speaker wasn't on yet. I turned it on after
Oh, true, yeah. Fair.
So,
Good job.
yeah.
Alright, keep this in though.
Yeah.
So model view controller is a precept that we've come up with to also start to separate code and to manage different layers of code, right? So we all know that model view controller exists, and we all know that we have some best practices that are associated with managing complexity. James Golick, Brian Helmkamp of Code Climate, and others have all talked about the various things that you might see as far as symptoms and how to manage it. If you have too much view logic, go ahead and put a view model together. Am I still typing out to the back there?
If you can't figure it out,
Keep going.
turn it off.
I just, it'll like the temptation to say something. It's huge. It's a burden. Thanks.
Is that better?
Yes, that's
Okay.
All right. Is it still on in here?
It's still on in here.
Okay, cool. It does seem to resonate a little less.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, have you guys used view models? Okay. No? So a view model is something that is not database related, right? And it is something that is a Ruby model that you can send to your view to help manage those view components, right? That's something that will help manage logic and keep it separate from your view, right? It's like a presenter, yes, yeah. You have too much logic in your controllers, you put in a form object, right? Have you guys used form objects? No? Alright, form objects are great. Policy objects or a service object, So a form object is basically something that manages all of the different nonsense in your form instead of your controller receiving a whole bunch of various options in its request and then going ahead and saying like, well, if this means this, then I have to also associate this internationalization option or whatever, right? All of those things should not be in your controller. You should have very thin controllers. And you should leave that to actual Ruby objects. So a form object is perfect for that. And those are things that you can just create. Now, what we're starting to get to are some conventions that are not part of Rails, right? These are not things that Rails gives you or enforces or has generators for or DHH knows about. He knows about. You have too much logic in your model, right? Your model is getting too crazy and complex, and there's too many various code logic in any particular model endpoint, and put it into a service object or a value object, which also allows you to decouple and allow logic to live in a way where, from a Sandy standpoint, is object-oriented, right? It's small, it's only doing what it's meant to do, and it interfaces with other objects that make use of it. Okay? So again, all of these things are practices that you all should look up at the very least. You all should definitely be using when your application gets to that point, and it will. And the kicker is, though, that it is not part of Rails. Right? The problem with the hat, Mike, that you really need to have some type of right?
To attach it to the hat.
Yeah, no.
Would you like help?
No. Fine. So you have your view model, your form object, service object, policy object, value object, query object, all of these things. Have you guys ever done a query object where you have a database, right, that has some very well-designed tables, right, for performance probably, right? But you have a object that basically is like a I don't know, it might be a parent of other objects, or it might be some type of hierarchical object-oriented object, right? Like a superclass or something that that maps itself onto like 4 different tables, right? But to you and your form, it is one thing, right? That's something where you start to look at things like query objects, where a query object would just be, its only purpose in life is to go ahead and create a query and pull together the data to create a, say, form object or a value object that you will use in your Rails application, right? It's not an anti-pattern to have objects that don't map directly to tables, right? It's a horrible way to say that.
Say more positive.
Yeah,
It's a good pattern.
it can be a perfectly reasonable pattern to have an object mapped to many different tables. Is that better? Cool.
So with the query objects, that's just like you're doing a bunch of like joins and includes to like load stuff up. Is that
Yeah, sure, yeah. And those are all of these objects, whether these service object, the form object, the view model, all of these things are not like things that are part of the standard Rails, but I guarantee I would say like, I'd say 80% of the like big Rails apps I've dealt with have at least one of these patterns. Right?
I think as soon as you get past like to do it, I've had to like make a service object.
Right. Yeah, and service object to an extent is like, there's at least been good talks about it, right? There's some frameworks probably, there's probably a gem for some of that.
The policy, have you used that pundit?
Sure, yes. Yeah, and those, there's plenty of gems available. These are patterns that you use in general. You don't have to have a gem for it. They're just poros, plain old Ruby objects that live in your Rails app and act as intermediaries between layers of M, V, and C. Right? They make your classes small. They make your units testable. They make your the code base easier to understand, and they enforce single responsibility. You know, your object should have one job and one job, right? Single responsibility. Great, but there's too many options, right? There's so many different things and patterns that I could institute. What's the best solution for my problem? Somewhat like living in New York for 6 years and then going into a super Walmart or something like that in Arkansas, right? It's a huge amount of real estate and there's so many different things in it, it's somewhat overwhelming, right? How do you know if you're doing the right pattern? You know, are you actually, that's somewhat of the attraction of Rails is that you have some of these decisions made for you, at least from the MVC side, right? Isn't there a gem for that? Well, that's kind of like what Trailblazer's for, okay? It basically takes all several different conventions that the author, or several different gems that the author has created that are enforced conventions for those repeatable patterns that he continually ran into at various companies and applications he's working on, right? These are the gems that he created: cells, operation, reform, representable, roar, and disposable, right? And they give you some clear conventions as to where you put your code, right? So this has become very popular in Rails apps to use Trailblazer now because of the very same reasons that you use, that we are all attracted to Rails apps and Pythonistas hate it, right? It's the enforcement of things that we don't want to think about, putting your code in a certain place in the file directory so that we all can walk into an app and know where to look for things, right?
The Trailblazer is these 6 gems.
It is those 6 gems.
I've heard of a couple of them actually.
Yes.
Yeah. I've heard of yeah. Cells and roar, I've definitely heard of. I think I've seen stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe in representatives. So yeah.
Yeah, these are all the same gems that are used elsewhere, but they've been packaged together and represented as Trailblazer, right? There's a book available that you can go check out. It's at LeanPub Trailblazer. You can also just go to the site, which has some very good documentation. Trailblazer.to. What's that domain from? We're not supporting Libya again, are we? Remember that? Like LY was everywhere? Yeah. Oops.
And the book is about $30.
What's that?
And the book is $30.
Is it? Yeah, it's not bad at all.
Toronto.
Toronto? Oh, who can...
Is it owned, not just CA? Oh, interesting.
Listen, and we can't feel bad about giving Toronto money, right?
Toronto's not too bad as far as
It's not like too bad.
violations or anything.
It's not too bad. So we're all good, right?
It's just so nice living here. I can't stand it.
It's like it's Manhattan, except for it's clean, which is disconcerting to me. Yeah.
Where's Tonga?
Wait.
What's Tonga? You can't say.
Wait, hold on.
Wait, tell me. The internet is telling me.
Tonga's cool. I guess
Is it? Have you been?
No, I saw some friends that are half Tongan.
Half Tongan.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not some people.
Oh, okay.
This says register TO as
The Polynesian thing?
Toronto's
Yeah, they're like
.to
Samoans.
domain.
Sure.
.to says Toronto, and then another place says it's Tonga. But I'm going to go with the Toronto for the one.
All right, we're all going to blame you if you're wrong. Oh yeah, fair. Yeah. All right. Nick Sutter. Nick Sutter wrote this. He's awesome. He's very approachable. He responds to tweets. He responded to a few things for making this. And he does a bunch of open desks or whatever, open office type. Yeah. So like you get on a hangout with him and he talks you through some stuff. Right? Yeah, he's awesome. So cells, reform, operation. These are all patterns that. Do you know what cells are? Who's used cells? I'm gonna duck out of this for a second.
It's like a kind of composite pattern for view stuff, so that a cell can be part of a page and you have a full object for it as opposed to. Yeah, you have full object representing it as opposed to just having like a view.
So rather than partials.
Template and a controller.
Yeah. So it's instead of having a bunch of partials and helpers, right? You have a cell that gives you a object-oriented view model with encapsulation, inheritance, testability, and clean view architecture, right? So that's cells.
Well, for a moment, I thought it was some like multi-threading library. Is there some similarly named?
Yes, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about cellular.
Okay.
Cellular? Something like that. It's not cellular either, because that's SMS. But I know exactly. It's like fabric, right? Fabric tip work. We know what cells is, and that's all that matters, right? So, right. So that's cells. Reform is a form object, right? So like form models, decoupling various form logic from your models.
Oh, I just realized that formtastic is a form object.
Yes. Well, it's part of it, yeah. Yeah, it's totally. Operation, which is not the game that you played as a child. I'm going for the Hasbro one, not the other. So agnostic implementation, agnostic method that returns status objects. So you can operation I've not used, but it's basically the idea that you can have a method that returns like a status object, and then from that status object you can create an instance that holds information of whether that operation has succeeded. You see it in like background jobs and things of that nature quite a bit. And right. So if you're a user and you can view and edit only your account, that's a standard pattern, right? Your new account should belong to the user that created them, right? So when you create a new account, that account should have an association already for that user. And your account must have a name. So you have a one-to-many association in your database. Right? User has many accounts. I could. But then I lose this.
Well, then zoom in
Zoom in.
in the bottom, or yeah, top left.
Do you guys know if there's anything going on? What?
In the top left is a zoom button, toolbar. On the toolbar.
There you go.
No, the one they label zoom.
Where do you see Zoom? Oh,
Right
right there.
there.
So it annoys me that in Keynote
Fit in window.
you can't have two screens and a presentation, right? I can't use the screen and also present. So unless I'm a total idiot, just like I demonstrated just now that I am. Right? It's totally possible. Right? I have not looked at the manual. So that is possible. Right, so in a traditional, so if you have this requirement, and you have a traditional Rails MVC model, where do you put your logic for creating this new account?
The controller.
Yeah? Is it the responsibility of the controller? Is it the responsibility of the model? It's hard to say, right? It's somewhere potentially in between. Maybe you have some additional form policy. So if you have an accounts controller, right, and you have like a traditional Rails application, you'll do something like create a private method that's set account, right? And you have to go ahead and grab the account user, right? So this is to view your actual account, to forbid those who are looking at others, right? And if you have Trailblazer, you just go ahead and do a present count read, right? And pass in params for your current user. Inside of your account, you have a count read object, which is a Trailblazer operation, right? Which includes model, but also includes policy, and you can have a find on account and set the policy for read for that account based on if you're the user, right? So this may seem like a great idea until you start having a lot of different policies, a lot of different shared objects, a lot of different non-model related logic that is ownership, right? Say, for instance, you have middle management, right, that has set a policy, right? Now you have to deal with that and look something up that's not necessarily a great relational concern. Then you'll want something like Trailblazer gives you to manage directly in the read portion of an object to see if the user is present, and if it is, then is that user my account, right? Then you know exactly that that's readable. Same with making new accounts, right? Create a new account. This is traditional. Account equals new. Account user is current user. If you save, then you redirect to account and you give a notice. Otherwise, render a new. And you get account params where you basically whitelist your name and institution type. In Trailblazer, rather, you again have process params and merge in your current user. In your account create Trailblazer operation, you'll create a policy, right, and which you can see if that policy allows you to create a new user. And that validates if the account is there and if your model user is correct. And again, you should be able to create. There's a test for it, actually. Yeah. Right. So if I create a user, and when I have valid parameters, that user has a name bank, then it should persist. It should set the user for the currently created account. But when you're not logged in, it should create a not authorized user, right? So again, makes it very testable as well. And it's consistent. You have policies that are set up for a account create RV, right? Spec account create spec. And then you create a policy, right? Where you have create defined, user's present, read is user present, and you are the user. So create, obviously, any user can create an account, and that user would be the responsible party. Otherwise, read is only the user that has created it. And for a contract, we do something similar. So you can see where operations, Tablescapes operation, starts to give you all the policies and various things that you've seen in, what was the gem you were using? Pundit, yeah. Similar account responsibilities like Pundit gives you. But in,
So what is the contract?
so this is just continuing down that, down the concept of a bank,
Oh, okay.
right? So you have a policy, and then you have a reform form object, right? So we saw that, did we cover reform yet? So reform is just form objects, okay? So if I have a contract, that's a form object. I'm associated with the account model, and I have properties on that form object. So very much like a model would validate a lot of form information, you can kick that off to your form object, right? And then when you define some transactions, that is an association with your form. So now you're creating very much like you would a reverse query object, right? A form that has a relationship both with account and transactions, right? So you have the ability to validate information on accounts, but also associate all the transactions for an account in one form. So rather than have a very complex view where you're actually dealing with several models that come through and then doing some craziness in your controller to create and associate those models together, you can just do it directly with a form object, and that keeps your model cleaner right? Both models. And it keeps our view very simple. All we're dealing with is the form object. So as your requirements get more and more complex for something that was at first a very simple MVC object, right? You suddenly have a framework to go ahead and start putting new logic in place where Rails doesn't give you those options, or at least doesn't give you opinions on those options. Right? So now, if I were to come onto this project and see that you've been using Trailblazer, I know exactly what maps these requirements to the new code. Just fantastic. And that makes situations where you have a user that has many accounts, and a user that has many categories, and a category that has many transactions, and an account that has many transactions, which is normally a nightmare to deal with. So you're effectively creating some type of secular dependencies here, or the potential therefore. Now you can manage that a lot better because you have frameworks for it. And I will post more of this to the site so that you can see the full code base. But the idea is that as you are building these complex views and complex middleware, right? Your operations can orchestrate the complex business logic that you're now creating, and it's no longer in one massive model or one convoluted set of logic in a controller. Your policies can now handle all of the authentication and all of the permissions, so authorization for authentication. And your views can be more encapsulating the logic that they have by incorporating cells. You have multiple models edited with one form by using reform. Representable and ROAR allow you to do a lot of API work, which is nice. And you have the ability to test very cleanly, because again, you have now very small objects rather than a model that is just insanely complex with a lot of logic to manage the fact that you're trying to save 3 objects by doing 1 transaction. And that's how they can go generally. If you're not using something like this or the concepts around it, you're creating a very fat method in your controller, or you have a ton of various management or workflow management methods within your model, which is not great either. And you get some documentation built into the code and some clear patterns, and you have a very good community around Trailblazer that will help you with a lot of the setup. Again, conventions are good because they give us a reasonable place to look and a place to repeatedly put our code. So not so great. The learning curve around Trailblazer is a little high. You have several different patterns that you're now learning. You have several different gems that you're now interacting with.
And I was disappointed when I saw on the official website, 2 of the gems have no documentation at all. It just says like to write the documentation.
That's true.
Read the book.
Yeah. Well, either read the book or I think, although those 2 gems probably don't, I think there's a full example on the website that uses all of them.
Well, there's a link to a GitHub.
Yes.
Yeah. Although it says it's part of the book, and if you.
Yeah, that's true. It does associate with it, but you don't have to purchase the book to download that source code and work through it, and which is nice.
Well, the reading for it actually says, please don't download this and work through it. Please buy the book if you're going to do that.
Yeah, and you should support Nick. I mean, let's be fair. Also, using reform objects with nested properties can be really tricky, but to that point, you probably should rethink your strategy if you have nested dependencies for associations anyway. I think there's a rule of two, right? If you go down more than one layer of nesting on any object, you're embracing evil. If you're not using Trailblazer fully, it can be really tricky to understand, especially if you have a different method of handling like form objects, and suddenly you're using the rest of like the policies, right? That can be really tricky because you've embraced kind of a convention and a style for all of these various middleware layers, and now you're breaking those conventions immediately. Yeah, and the model namespacing also can be goofy, but I don't think most applications you shouldn't. Well, just don't break namespacing. Don't keep shoving more things into the namespacing that Trailblazer gives you. You should be fine. So. Yeah, I would say anything that you have any idea of an app that's going to need to scale. So if your MVC app that is which is going to be an MVP for a startup, and you know for a fact that you're going to have some success or about to have some success, start to look at these patterns, right? Because you're going to grow very quickly. And if you grow very quickly, you're going to want to put in this code.
When you say scale, are you talking about performance or complexity?
Complexity.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Performance, that's an entirely different success problem. But yeah, again, if you're to the point where you need to rethink whether you should be on Rails or Ruby, then you're doing very well indeed. Yeah. Because especially with things like Amazon and I think Amazon still gives you 12 months of startup for their entire cloud application now. 12 months of free services. So you have that and a ton of other services, and that Heroku and Google Cloud Services, are fairly easy to implement Rails for all of those. If you actually outgrow that and can't just and you have money because you have succeeded and can't throw more iron on it, then yeah, you're doing very well and good for you.
Do you have an idea of what the cutoff is? Like how many controllers or whatever or pages on your site you need before you should?
There's I can't never say. I won't fall into the trap that Sandy Metz fell into. That's it's entirely up to your sense of complexity. Again, I went through the warning signs of complexity. You should be looking at those rather than say benchmarks of like how many controllers you have or. Again, I think as long as you have, I've seen just straight MVC apps go through like 25, 30 controllers, and they're just dealing with various slim models, and that's fine. It's very understandable still, right? As long as the conceptual understanding of the application stays fairly slim.
Did you say that cells is so you don't have like a ton of partials?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
So you're basically using cells as a view model rather than using partials at all.
Okay. So you're just calling methods to get what you need.
Correct. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so that's a good idea of where to use.
Do you think it's better to, so like a lot of the things that it's abstracting actually implemented by itself, and I could see like if I came into this without ever doing that, it's sort of like what's going on.
Yeah, and that's why the bad stuff might be a learning curve, right? For sure. But I think all of these are great practices and normal practices that most Rails developers will have to encounter at some point. Especially, it's totally worth the $30 to sink into the book. Or at the very least, listen to all of Nick's podcasts that he's done and watch a couple of additional videos. And dig into some GitHub code that actually implements Trailblazer. There's some really good implementations, and you'll have a fair sense after you consume a couple of reads of it of where to use cells, how to use cells better. But again, I think reform and cells are two places that you'll definitely see some benefit right away. Yeah, Trailblazer community is fantastic. Nick's Sutter has really done a great job of this. And again, he's been on, here's the Lean Pub link. Just get on Gitter and get chat right away to him, which has been fantastic. Here's the main site. And for just good references, there's some very good articles on refactoring active models, active record models. Code Climate, Brian from Code Climate did a great article on it, on where these problems will arise.
The bottom right button code.
Oh yeah, cool. This is a great article on fairly common Rails developer mistakes, right? And these are all the anti-patterns that that Trailblazer is trying to solve for you.
One trap that I fell into when I was first starting out though was worrying too much about patterns when I needed to just get something done.
Yeah.
And so
that's fair.
I just feel
yeah.
I start out just make it work and then go back and do this stuff.
So you've all made Rails apps, right? You have code bases that you're looking at right now that have these anti-patterns, right? And that's the point, right? So this gives you a great way to start refactoring those and not make those same mistakes again, right? And mistakes is a strong word. Again, I think Rails developers, as a framework, it gives you a fantastic platform for going ahead and making things work. And by adhering to MVC and some fairly good object-oriented patterns, you're going to write better code than you would without it, right? But you're going to see over and over again these same mistakes that were covered in this article, right? Just too much logic in your controller, too much logic in your view, too much logic in your model, and you see the pattern here, right? You have objects that are doing too much, and that's as Sandy Metz clearly lays out in object-oriented Ruby. That is not single responsibility. It's not good object-oriented design. You want to have some very clear objects that only do what they're told to do. They have one job, they do it right? Using generic helper classes as a dumping ground, and that also goes into partials and helpers and things of that nature. Using too many gems. I can't help you. Yeah, I mean, too many gems is a thing that you're going to see. You're also going to see that in JavaScript as well. I've worked with a lot of JavaScript developers who, I worked with some guy who just recently spent a day and a half looking for a node module that would allow him to do better ellipses management for overflow, right? Instead of just writing the code, right? And that's a common pattern, right? Is that you have, especially when you go to a framework like Rails or React or something like that, you get into a place where you're like, I need this feature. There must be a module or a gem for that, right? And you'll even work with developers who are like, oh, why are you doing that? You know, there's a simple gem for doing just what you're trying to do, right? And in some cases, that's a good way to go, especially when you're talking about something that's very hard to do and it takes a lot of time. But when you start doing every feature and grabbing a gem for it, you start getting into a serious problem because, yeah, if you try to basically do a one-size-fits-all ensemble, you get a wardrobe like me and nothing fits right. So, fair?
Yeah, fair.
All right. But I will stand by my innovation of the hat knife. It is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you should rock.
I think like Sandy Knight's always, and like I think this gets lost a lot of times. And again, I think I did it when I first started out. Is like she always starts her talk saying usually something like, "I'll just throw if statements in there until I go blue in the face, and then I'll go back and abstract things." And I think it's really easy when you're starting out to try to abstract things too soon, and you're like, you can't wrap your head around it.
Yeah, prefactoring is a horrible thing.
Right, and even I see it with React too. Like I just wrote a little React app last Friday, and I didn't worry about extracting things into components. I just had like the nasty code in render, and then later refactored it out, and it's like all these nice little components.
Yeah, because then the problem is there, and you handle problems when they're there, not beforehand.
Right. And if I had tried to do that before, I would have. The components would have been named poorly. It would have taken me longer.
Right. Yeah. You try to do something generic that handles a lot of different cases. Yeah.
So I think it's sometimes better to just like make it gross first and then make it nice later.
For sure, and especially if you're dealing with stuff like Trailblazer, yeah, you should. The beauty is that if you've dealt with a Rails app, you come to the place where you've made all of the mistakes, or you've created all of the code complexity that this is trying to remove, rather than mistakes. You've created the code complexity that this is trying to simplify, right? And that's the whole point.
So in general, do a lot of folks start with Trailblazer, or does it more generally come in later?
I would say that if you know that you need to scale, right, complexity-wise, and you know how to use this, then you should probably start with it, right?
Okay.
But I would first take an existing project, right, that is using patterns inconsistently, right? It's not doing the things that this wants to do, and start to refactor to use Trailblazer to alleviate and simplify the complexity that it has. So suddenly you can get to a place, say like you have a application that went through several sprints and is in a place where it does have back controllers, it does have a bunch of different problems in it or complexity in it that you want to simplify, and you need to test it better, right? This is a great thing to spend a week on, right? Spend a week, put in Trailblazer. Start to eliminate that complexity in those large controllers, and be able to test each unit very effectively. That's great. That's a great place to start with. And that would give you a good handle on using the the gem, or the gems rather, and get you to a place where you understand where it's applicable and know the next time you do start a new project that you think will scale to this place, and then you can use it outside, just outside the gate. Does that make sense? Cool.
Which are the gems that are rolled into Trailblazer that sometimes get used by themselves? Like I can see cells.
Like cells and like reform, I think, are the two that I've seen more. What you said you've seen a few of them, right?
Well, I mean,
You use
looking
the-
at some code we have, where I work, and I think there was Roar in some of them. And
Sure, which is API stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely.
Right.
I didn't look to see. I didn't know it was supposed to be like part of something which had other gems.
Well,
Roar,
again,
I
like
think,
these are all things
one of the
that
others, yeah.
that he wrote earlier, and now has like grouped into this general Trailblazer framework. Cool.
So which gem is it that references the convention for the file tree, if any?
Oh, so that's, I think, like all of them have like the Trailblazer. So if you install Trailblazer,
Is there a 7th gem called Trailblazer that just...
there is hold on. So, it's in the Git group before. So Trailblazer Rails has just a general right? Gem Trailblazer Rails inside of any Rails app, and it will have all of your app concept stuff, right? And also the namespacing. And I think that's all that needs, but
Concepts being.
that's the general like folder structure,
Okay.
right? So like
Sort of adds
so like if you
or
see
replaces.
like concepts account, views, concepts account row, cell, right? And that's where all of these various cell concepts, right? Or reform form, right, is also in concept account contract, right? So, like, basically everything seems to sit into concepts, at least in all of the, I believe you can change that, but that's the general file layout. You
still
see
have-
that as well here.
You still have your assets.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So like in Trailblazer, files are grouped by concept and sit in one directory, right? So you have a concept like comment, right? Which might encapsulate and have a mapping to a model, but may not necessarily.
Right.
And that has all of your various Trailblazer gem integrations in it.
Is Twin an example of like
What's
a
that?
particular thing, or is that so I get operation cell policy views with Twin?
Twin?
Yeah.
Oh. I'm not sure. Data twins. That's a. I've not used the data twin stuff. Let's look it up.
It's better than looking at leaflets.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh wait, no.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so like a logic, abstraction layer, like operations, form object, operations, data twins. I don't know. I'm assuming that might be like a data clone of a data layer. So like if you're like maybe implements like a null object pattern or other data-like patterns.
Oh yeah, that would make sense.
That would make sense. But I'm completely talking without any like basis of knowledge, and clearly like it's not in the
Or maybe
general
it's,
documentation.
I'm forgetting the name of it. When Sandy Metz talks about the bicycles, and then there's the different types of bicycles.
Just extends a comment a bit.
Yeah.
Could be. I don't know. That's your assignment, is to find out what data twins are and report back. Alright. That's all I have. So that's a good overview and introduction to Trailblazer, which will give you some something good to start with. And from then on, I would say it's definitely great to use for any project that you're doing in Rails. And my next Rails project will definitely use it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
How did you originally get introduced to Trailblazer?
A friend of mine started using it on a project, and I've used most of the patterns that it uses in some sense. Definitely, I think I was like diving into like doing form objects on a project for the first time on this new project, and he said, "Oh, are you using Trailblazer?" And I'm like, "What?" And he started talking.
Will that objects in Rails book kind of cover these patterns?
A lot of them, yes.
Standalone?
Yeah, but it doesn't like really get into any conventional implementation for it,
Right.
right? Which gives you a lot of freedom, but unless you really know how to do a solid implementation of these patterns, it doesn't really give you the constraints that Trailblazer does.
Right. Just because I feel like that's one of the things that's missing from, like, for instance, coming out of a boot camp or coming out of like a
Good object-oriented design.
or just understanding, like, you'll just hear these and you're like, well, okay, what is that? Like presenter or like, and then people use them interchangeably. Like some people say presenter, but they really just mean decorator. But like then you're just like, now you're just talking about semantics, really. But
For
not
sure.
really. But some people argue it's not true.
So the problem is that you have things like presenters, which has a hard definition, but then it is used interchangeably on projects and implementations, where they're really mixing the meaning of presenter with decorator, right? So that the meaning is completely lost. And in general, it doesn't matter that much because they both are achieving a similar goal, right? Which is why people have mixed them up into doing the same thing anyway, right? So it's you'll get a, it's like when say like the clone or what's the new Star Wars movie? Rogue One dropped, right? That trailer, and like people like, you're pronouncing AT-AT instead of AT-AT. And technically they might be right. But it does not matter because you mean the same thing, right? Or at least you're referring to the same solution to the problem, which is Rails.
But I just think it's
I do not know what AT is, but 100%.
I just think it's good to like learn about at least some of these and implement some of them before maybe to try using Trailblazer.
I don't know. Again, like I think it's perfectly reasonable to install and use Trailblazer, and at least then you have some constraints, right? If you're feeling more ambitious, I think the easiest thing is to do a view object or a form object, potentially a query object, something like that. Those are fairly easy to implement. But then again, you're starting to then create your own patterns, right? So I don't know. I wouldn't know what to say to someone who's never approached these problems. That it's the best idea to go ahead and do Trailblazer rather than do your own, or go ahead and explore each problem individually. I think it's perfectly reasonable to use Trailblazer, and at least you have a community to work off of, and some frameworks to keep some constraints to yourself. Engineering needs parameters and constraints. Otherwise, we feel like we can do anything and we try.
I mostly just use like concerns when I feel like my models are getting too big. Is there like something that concerns me?
So concerns are a solution to an extent, but they are generic solutions, right? And they're not actually solving something that a query object specifically. So it's like single responsibility. What is the single thing that a concern does?
Maybe something like handle authentication.
Sure, yeah. A concern can handle authentication or authorization, right? But it is not, it becomes a dumping ground, right? You have concerns and they do many things. Right? And you're going to look for, say, like, I know because this is a Rails app, and this is a concern that seems to, by its naming convention, deal with authorization, right, or authentication. Then I might be able to figure out where that is, and that code does exactly this, and these are the tests for it, etc. But if you were to use something like Trailblazer, then you would know specifically because you'd have policies, right? And those would actually be meant to handle exactly authorization issues, right? So that's the difference. You're right. Again, it's perfectly reasonable to have poros and concerns handle all of this, right? Plain old Ruby objects and generic extensions for models can just go ahead and handle all of this. But you can also use Sinatra and not use Rails conventions and have just plain old Ruby objects handle every aspect of what Rails is doing. So this is more specificity and conventions on top of Rails to give you just a generic, all of the comfort of knowing where your code goes, right? All of the comfort of knowing that view objects go here and policy objects go here, and this is how I generally write them, right? But yeah, concerns are a perfectly reasonable solution.
A picture of my the image around for like the cabinet where you hold all of your Tupperware stuff, and it's just sort of all thrown in there. Yeah, it works.
Sure.
You know where it is, but it sounds like Trailblazer would actually organize it for you.
Yeah, I used to have just like several drawers and bins full of just electronics. And various Arduino and wires and things of that nature, which was awful. And now I have just several bins, one of which is just like resistors, right? And that's still a mess. And I still have to like get it out. But at least all of the resistors are in one place. I don't have to go through a huge bin to find the proper resistor for a project I'm working on. Or like finding different screw sizes, things of that nature. It's definitely just organization. And that makes it easy to test too. All right.
Alright, thank you guys. Feel free to, if there's any food left or anything, or hang out.